Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing a summary of the Songbird and the Heart of Stone, which is the third book in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. I'm going to be doing a full kind of recap, summary, and like a review at the end. My biggest fear in doing this recap is that there are so many words in this that I'm like, am I pronouncing this right? But I'm sure one of you guys are going to correct me. I read the Songbird and the Heart of Stone, I think at the beginning of this year, 2025, and I wrote about it on my blog doing this full summary. And the fourth book just came out on August 5th. So when I posted this summary in January of the Songbird and the Heart of Stone, it was really partially for myself so that when I go back and read the fourth book, I haven't read it yet, that I can remember what happened, because sometimes you just take these long breaks in between these fantasy books and you read so many books in between that I'm like, who is this? What's going on? I don't even remember what happened in the last book. Post has done really well in the past few weeks because I think a lot of you guys are in the same boat of like, what happened in the Songbird and the Heart of Stone? I don't remember. So I wanted to make like a video recap of what happened in book 3, The Songbird and the Heart of Stone, so that if you are going and about to read The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk, the fourth book in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, that you'll kind of have a refresher of what happened. First 2 books of the Crowns of Nyaxia series are kind of like a couplet, and then The Songbird and the Heart of Stone and this new 4th book, The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk, they are a couplet together. And then I believe there's going to be a 5th book to kind of complete this series. Songbird and the Heart of Stone, the main character is Misha. So if you remember, Misha was a character in the first 2 books of the Crowns of Nyaxia series. She's not like a major player, but she's Rain's best friend. And so these couplets are following her. So they are interconnected in a way, but you are not following the same main characters as you were in the first 2 books. And since I have not read the 4th book, I don't know how much of this information I'm going to give you is incredibly relevant. So I'm going to give a really in-depth summary. Okay, so if you recall from books 1 and 2, Misha is Rain's best friend, and she was a human acolyte for the god of the sun, Atraxas. I'm so worried I'm going to pronounce so much of this stuff wrong. But she was turned into a vampire against her will by a shadowborn prince, Malik. In book 1, you kind of get glimpses of Misha's sun and fire powers that she had received from Atraxas. But Atraxas is a god that the vampires don't generally serve, as the vampires serve Nyaxia. In book 1, when the moon palace gets set on fire and Misha is stuck inside, she gets injured and she is removed from the Kajari, that kind of like Hunger Games kind of, you know, battle royale that they're doing. After she gets out of the fire, she keeps saying to Rain that he didn't answer. And eventually it's revealed that the god that Misha had served, Atraxas, didn't answer her prayers in that moment of being caught in that fire and being trapped, and had taken away her powers in the midst of that fire. But then in book 2, as Rain and Oriah are fighting to regain control of the House of the Night, Malik is visiting them at the House of Night. And it wasn't known to Rain and Oriah at that time that he was the one who had turned Misha into a vampire. So during one of the battles, Misha and Oriah come across Malik, and Misha kills Malik. So when Oriah and Rain finally regain control, they try to spin Malik's death as the doing of the like usurpers who were trying to kind of like take down Oriah and Rain. Near the end of book 2, Misha confesses to Rain that she can't stay with them at the House of Night. She wants to kind of like resume traveling, that she like just doesn't feel like she can stay in one place and stuff like that. That being said, the Songbird and the Heart of Stone kind of picks up sometime after Misha has left the House of Night. It starts with Misha in a cell within the House of Shadow. People in the Shadowborn house, I guess, have mind reading abilities, and Ygritte, who is one of the House of Shadow heirs, she's Malik's sister. She is kind of like interrogating Misha. And she's able to enter Misha's mind to confirm that Misha was the one who murdered Malik. Later, Ygritte brings Misha before Raoul, who is the king of the House of Shadow, as kind of like a birthday gift of retribution to his son. So there's this brief moment where it is clear that something is kind of like off with Raoul. He has like some kind of like memory problems, but then they plan to kill Misha and send her head back to Oriah and Rain as kind of like a threat. But before he kills Misha, someone tells him to stop, and it's Raoul's bastard son, Asar. And he asks the king not to kill Asar had noticed that Misha's tattoo that was a symbol of the Order of the Destined Dawn. When he sees that tattoo, he thinks, oh, she's a day drinker, and he thinks maybe she can benefit him in this task that Nyaxia has given him. He's kind of like questioning her in front of everyone, and despite kind of having her fire powers revoked and believing that he had kind of completely abandoned her, Misha is able to kind of like call out to Atraxis and is able to summon some fire, and this is kind of like enough to prove that maybe she would be helpful for Asar's purposes. So he takes her to Morthrin, I hope I'm saying that right, which is a prison created by the gods, and it's said to be cursed. So once they get there, he is kind of like testing Misha by having her participate in necromancy, which is raising of the dead, because one of the prisoners of Morthrin had just died and happened to be a human acolyte of Atraxis. So in order to resurrect someone, you need items to represent the 5 elements of someone, those 5 elements being body, breath, psyche, secrets, and soul. So Misha is able to contribute a candle that she lights using her Atraxis's fire, given power to complete the necromancy spell. And then Misha finds out that Asar needs her and this other acolyte to go with him into the underworld, and that he was given this task by Nyaxia to resurrect her late husband Alaris, who is the god of death. So while Misha is sleeping that night, Atraxis comes to her, I guess in a dream, and explains that a god cannot truly kill another god. When Alaris married Nyaxia, they had defied the White Pantheon, which I think is like the name of the gang of all the gods or something like that. So when he and his siblings, the other gods of the White Pantheon, tried to kill their brother Alaris, they were only able to partially kill him, not a true death. So Atraxis was aware of Asar's plan to resurrect Alaris, so he asked Misha to actually accompany Asar, but instead of resurrecting him, actually give Alaris a true death. And he explains to her that they will pass through the 5 sanctums of death in the underworld, which are named after the same elements that are needed to resurrect someone. Before Alaris's death, he had placed relics in each sanctum of the underworld. However, Atraxis went in and locked up some of those elements just to make it more complicated in order to resurrect him. So therefore, Asar needs an Atraxis acolyte or follower to use the power of the sun to unlock each of the relics, since Atraxis was the one who had locked them up. And that is why Asar knows that he needs to bring Misha and Chandra, this other acolyte. So Misha is terrified, but she feels like maybe she does this, that she can win Atraxis's love back. So she agrees to do it. So the next day before they go into the underworld, a guard is kind of assigned to them by the House of Shadow, presumably by Raoul. So the 4 of them plus Asar's semi-dead dog. His name is, I don't know if it's Luce or Luce. I don't know if I'm speaking it in Italian. Enter the underworld from Morthrin. So this part is probably the hardest to explain, and I have a hard time comprehending it myself, to be quite honest. But Morthrin, the prison, is kind of like a bridge into the underworld through the sanctums. And as you go through the sanctums, it's called the descent. And Morthrin spans through the majority of the underworld, but not all of it. So it's kind of like the land of the living, Morthrin, and then you've got the start of the underworld. And as you get through each sanctum, there's a part of Morthrin that they kind of are able to stop in. So they start in the Sanctum of Body, and there are these wraiths everywhere. And they are attracted to the living and can kill them. But Misha recognizes one of these wraiths. And they battle their way through a temple where they are able to retrieve the first relic, which is a black Ascidian tree branch that is coated in blood. And this branch was what Nyaxia had tried to use to attack Alaris when they had their first initial meeting. So once they retrieve the relic, they're able to kind of leave the Sanctum of Body and enter this offshoot of Morthrin that they think is supposed to be wraith-free. And they use that time to kind of rest before moving on to the next sanctum, which is the Sanctum of Breath. So in the night, Misha wakes up and finds Asar kind of fighting these wraiths in the hallway. And throughout Morthrin, there are these gates to enter the underworld with glyphs and spells and stuff like that to keep out the dead. However, as Morthrin ages and without Alaris to help maintain the sanctums, and Morthrin, the underworld is kind of beginning to crumble. So this means that souls are not able to pass through the descent, each of the sanctums, as they should. So kind of think like they're kind of stuck in purgatory. With all these souls that are not able to pass, it's kind of putting all this pressure on the gates. So Asar is able to use his magic to kind of repair these wards and gates, and Misha is able to use her magic to help him complete the spell repairs faster. So Asar is like really impressed with her magic skills and asks her to help him fix the wards because their shadow magic has this like kind of connection. And they kind of suspect that it may be because Misha had received her Shadowborn powers from his brother. Misha is like very hesitant though to help him because she doesn't like using her shadow magic. It kind of feels like it's a betrayal to the sun god. But this is despite the fact that her sun powers are like very much dwindling at this point. And also, every time she uses the power of the sun, she gets these scars all along her arms because vampires are naturally opposed to the sun. So whenever she kind of harnesses that, it like hurts her physically. So Asar's kind of honest with her and is like, it doesn't seem like your god loves you that much because like, I don't think he would be hurting you physically if he loved you so much. But she ultimately decides to help him because it would help their end goal of retrieving all these relics. So one night when they are fixing the wards, she sees this wraith that she recognizes again and is calling out to her to help him. Asar asks her about it and she tells him his name is Eomen? I don't know. What she doesn't tell Asar is that he was a guard at the Citadel where she was a priestess and that they had kind of crushes on one another. When Misha's sister Sasha had kind of caught them brushing elbows, she really reprimanded Misha because she was like this chosen follower of Atraxis. And it's kind of vague throughout the beginning of like what this chosen follower means, like what all that entailed, and we kind of get to that later on. Eventually everyone reaches the Sanctum of Breath where they battle their way to the temple there, and they are up against this spirit called Ophelia, who clearly knows Asar, and is not quite a wraith, but is also not quite alive. So Asar stalls Ophelia, and Misha and Chandra are able to use their powers to retrieve the second relic, which are poppy petals from the field where Nyaxia and Alaris had their first kiss. Then they make it back to Morthrin, and Elias and Asar get into a fight because Elias recognizes Ophelia and suspects that Asar is kind of doing all of this for her. And he tells Asar that they should just turn around and keep the relics that they have, and that the relics would bring the House of Shadow more power. He kind of references how much power having a relic gave the House of Night in Book 2 when they were wielding Alaris's teeth and blood. But Asar declines, and later that night, Misha has a nightmare and kind of runs to Asar. She's really upset because she didn't see Eomen in the Sanctum of Breath, and she's really worried that he's going to be stuck in the descent forever. But Asar is able to show her that he did pass and that he was able to help him do so. And he tells her that he goes into the descent sometimes just to help souls pass. And he does that just by like listening to them and showing them empathy basically. And Asar had learned that in just like kind of talking with Eomen and like trying to help him pass, that he had died in a journey with Misha to preach the light of Atraxis to vampires. We kind of find out more about that journey later on. Throughout the book, we're kind of getting these like flashbacks of Misha's life at the Citadel as this like chosen priestess of Atraxis before she was turned into a vampire, and the sins that she committed during that time. So in these flashbacks, you kind of begin to get this picture of her relationship with the sun god Atraxis and where her kind of crisis of faith began. So in one of these flashbacks, the acolytes capture a vampire. Misha believes that every soul can have light in it, and she tries to befriend this vampire in jail. But one day she finds that the acolytes have tied this vampire down in the sun and are letting the sun kill him as kind of like an offering to Atraxis. And they hang his corpse up in the courtyard, which just infuriates Misha, and she climbs up and cuts his corpse down from where it's hanging. We kind of get this conversation between Atraxis and Misha, where Atraxis says vampires are tainted, they are the product of the goddess's betrayal, and Misha is arguing, but it's not their fault, and he says, no, Amara, it is not, but their goddess is to blame for that. She's the one who damned them to such a fate. There is nothing left in them to save. Which, even though her sun god is telling her that, like, she just doesn't believe that. She believes that anyone can kind of be saved or like brought to this light. So then the group moves to the Sanctum of Psyche, and as they are making their way, all of a sudden Asar kind of looks down at his arms and he has an air mark on him, which is denoting him as the new rightful ruler of the House of Shadow, which is insinuating that his father Raoul has passed away. So Elias steps forward, and instead of kind of like pledging allegiance to his new king, he says, finally, and takes his dagger and Asar's side. And then he pushes Asar off a cliff. So Luz and Misha jump in after him into the depths of the Sanctum of the Psyche. And while they're in this depths of the Psyche, Misha kind of sees her life in the Citadel kind of displayed before her. Specifically this offering night to Atraxis, where you finally kind of get all the pieces put together that her relationship with Atraxis was kind of more than just like being special or like a priestess, but that instead Atraxis had chosen her from like a really young age, like 8, and was going to make her one of his wives. So really just yuck. So when Chandra rescues her from the sea, she realizes that she had kind of been sharing all those memories with Asar since they were both in the depths of the Psyche. And despite Chandra's pleas to like leave Asar, Misha goes in after him, and Chandra is attacked by wraiths. And when she tries to save Chandra, she is hit with this memory of Chandra's of what Chandra had done to end up in jail at Morthrin. Chandra had been tasked with being the healer to help vampires in labor, like birthing baby vampires. Instead of healing them, she was killing the baby vampires in the name of Atraxis. So she ended up in jail, and Misha realizes that she doesn't have time to save Chandra and Asar, and being kind of just like appalled by what Chandra had done, she leaves Chandra to die. As she goes to save Asar, she's able to witness the memories that he's kind of processing, specifically when Malik killed his dog Luce, and when Asar first attempted necromancy to resurrect the dog. Then it kind of pivots to him meeting Ophelia and ultimately her murder by Malik. Asar and Ophelia had kind of been in a relationship, but Malik Ophelia because he was jealous of Asar. And Asar tries to use necromancy to resurrect Ophelia, but it fails, and it kind of turns her into this half-dead, half-alive being. When they finally get to the temple within the Sanctum of the Psyche, Misha finally uses her shadow magic to fight a reflection of herself and gets the next key, which is a silver ring that Alaris had worn to bind him to the White Pantheon that he removed on his wedding day to Nyaxia. They get out and they realize that Elias is gone and had stolen one of the poppy petals. One of the poppy petals missing isn't necessarily going to hurt their mission to resurrect Alaris, but it does likely give Elias some power like Alaris's teeth and blood did in Book 2. As they trek to the Sanctum of Secrets, they take a break by visiting Esme, which is Asar's friend and the former warden of Morthrin, who is dead but also somehow has a house within the descent. And Esme tries to kind of talk Asar out of his mission, and she has a private conversation with Misha about how the burns on her arms will never stop if she remains with her allegiance to Atraxis. Misha and Asar finally have a conversation about the memories that they saw from one another, specifically where Asar is kind of talking to Misha about seeing that she was a bride of Atraxis rather than just a special acolyte or a priestess, and how messed up the relationship between Atraxis and Misha is. And right when you think things are about to get steamy, the house is attacked by raids and Ophelia and Misha's late sister Sasha. Oh, and Malik. Esme is able to kind of fight them off so that Asar and Misha can escape, and as they enter the Sanctum of Secrets, there is this Misha flashback to her turning when Atraxis gave her the mission to save a vampire. And in this flashback, it really seems as if he knows that he's sending her on a fool's mission, but she sees it as a redemption and kind of winning him back after she cut down the vampire corpse and disappointed Atraxis. As they are in the Sanctum of Secrets, the setting that Asar and Misha both see are different. So Misha sees a beach in Vostis where the Citadel was, and Asar never reveals what he sees. They're both really injured at this point, and given that there is nothing else living in the underworld, there is no blood for them to feed on as vampires to heal themselves. Misha does not want to feed from Asar because it feels like a complete betrayal to Atraxis, but ultimately they both feed from each other, and we finally get a spicy scene, and then they both begin to heal. They make it to this big building where once again they run into Ophelia and Sasha and Malik, and they briefly battle them but make it into the inner temple where they are safe. There's this big empty box in the middle and they think that the relic is gone. So they decide to wait it out in the temple until the coast is kind of clear, and Misha tells Asar that it is her fault that Sasha is stuck in the underworld. Even though she feels all this guilt, she's upset because she feels like Sasha was so religious and did all the right things to Atraxus, and she feels really disappointed in Atraxus that he kind of let her end up there and not rescuing her kind of from the descent. Get a really good spicy scene of them drinking blood on the altar, and but because that blood was spilling on the altar, it summons Atraxus, who sees Misha being unfaithful to him. So he's furious with her and calls her out, but she calls him out as to why her sister is stuck in the underworld. Being the jerk that he is, he forces her to remember why her sister died, which is a memory that she had really deeply repressed. When Misha was first turned into a vampire, she was on the streets panicking, looking for her sister, and when she finally found her, the bloodlust of being a vampire took over Misha, and she was the one who sister. Misha begs Atraxus to please spare Asar when they finally kill Alaris and to please save Sasha. Atraxus agrees and tells her that the relic is not gone, that she just kind of has to look below the surface of the temple. When she finds Asar again, he looks really shaken up himself, but he doesn't tell her what he saw. They find the relic, which was a golden arrow that was given to Alaris by the White Pantheon, I believe, with the intention of killing Nyaxia. So then they finally make it to the Sanctum of Soul, and Asar tells Misha that he is going to need her to help perform the necromancy. They run into their enemies one more time where Asar kills a soul death of Malik. But as Ophelia is trying to kill Misha, Misha is able to kind of like empathize with her and help her pass peacefully into the underworld. Asar and Misha start to perform the necromancy spell when Misha kind of finally starts to put all the pieces together, and she realizes that Asar is going to sacrifice himself as the soul portion in order to complete the spell because Alaris is his ancestor. Doing so, Asar kind of like disappears, but Misha kind of keeps holding on to one part of her magic to not let Asar go when Atraxus kind of like appears. And Misha realizes that Atraxus wants Alaris dead because the gods have kind of like a communal pool of power, and having one of them dead would give Atraxus more power. So she ends up taking the golden arrow relic and driving it into Atraxus's neck, and his death shatters the sun and plunges the whole world into darkness. Interruption of this spell brings Asar back, but steals Alaris's power to Asar. Misha is like fatally injured from her fight with Atraxus when Nyaxia appears. He criticizes them for not completing the mission and refuses to help Misha. The other gods of the White Pantheon appear and they chain up Asar until they figure out how to handle him and his power, and they toss Misha aside and she dies. And then it kind of ends with Misha awakening in the descent, presumably in the Sanctum of Body, where it begins. Vincent is there, who is the dead king of the Nightborn, throwback to book 1, telling her that they have work to do. I realized as my fading vision took in his tear-streaked face that Asar would never let me go. Not in life, not in death. He would shatter it all for me. I loved this book. I really wasn't sure if I was going to like it because I wasn't really taken with Misha's character in books 1 and 2 of the Crowns of Nyaxia series. But I felt like her character was like a breath of fresh air to read. I think I started realizing that so many romantasy books that I read, the female main character are kind of like angsty and like fighty, and Misha is just like sunlight and happy and golden, but she still was complex and had flaws and had depth to her. I also felt like it was really well done, this kind of like slow revelation of what exactly Atraxus was to Misha. And I really enjoyed her character development of kind of learning what love really is and what it should feel like. And I felt like it left on such a good cliffhanger, and especially connecting it with book 1 by including Vincent. I just felt like that was perfect. I felt like there was a really good slow burn, slow build between Asar and Misha. I was getting a little fatigued with the constant like, oh, here's Ophelia again. Oh, here's Malik again. Like, oh, another battle like between these same characters. And it's just like the same thing over and over again. I kind of felt like maybe it would have been more interesting if there was like a different villain per se in each of the sanctums that was related to their past, instead of having like the same villain show up in each sanctum, if that makes sense. Also, I feel like I need to go back and read books 1 and 2 because for some reason, I really thought the vampires feeding off of one another didn't do anything. I'm probably getting it confused with another book though. But I swear that was like a topic in books 1 and 2 that like it didn't do anything. But what do I know? I thought that's why they specifically drink from humans and animals. I'm probably misremembering. Overall, I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I think looking back, I almost would give it like a 4.25. I really enjoyed this one, and I am so excited to read book 4. Once I get through book 4, I will do another recap, another summary and review. So that way when book 5 comes out, hopefully not too long from now, that you guys will have kind of a reference to refresh your memory on books 3 and 4 so that you have a little bit more context going into book 5. Let me know what you guys thought of this video, these reviews, if there's anything I can do or add or take away that you guys want to see or don't want to see in these kinds of videos. Let me know what you thought of the Songbird and the Heart of Stone. I really liked it, but I'm always curious what other people think, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!